Welcome to Quilting's first reality show, live and unscripted, with Susan Smith.
Hello and welcome. I'm Susan Smith. You are in my studio, Stitched by Susan. Coffee in hand, I am ready to get quilting. Today's project is a fun one. It relates to an episode a few weeks ago. It was very public. I was having a birthday, and my students, with Joan Parker at the helm, got together and created a memory quilt. And so that's the project I'm quilting today, and I'll talk more about the quilt as the show progresses. It is a fairly large quilt at 78 inches square, so I won't get the whole thing finished in today's show. But a few of the things we're going to focus on are a pieced backing, and it's asymmetrical, so it's not obvious where to place it. So we're going to talk about the placement when the backing is what you can't see when you're quilting, right? How to put that where you want it to be. I've chosen to do a certain type of quilting in the border and something else in the center as an all-over design. So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about some thread choices because this quilt has high contrast areas and other things. And of course, freehand quilting as we go along. So these live and unscripted shows, because I'm airing it as a live stream, it's a reality show. You get to see quilting in real time. You get to see the real things as they happen, the thread breaks, etc. This is real life. Mr. Producer's looking at me with a question mark. Okay, hang on a second while I adjust the mic just a little. Apparently it's got a problem. Is that better? Yeah. Okay, there we go. That's fixed. It's the little things, right? Okay, back to why we do live and unscripted. The purpose of these shows is just to welcome you into my studio and let you see a project in its entirety. And not necessarily from the beginning all the way to the end, but all the things that are transpiring. So whether it's the bobbin thread running out, or maybe even a needle break or a tension issue, those are all part of the show. So you get to see the process. And you know, in recent months, I've had tension difficulties, and I've let those shows stand, even though they were hard for me because things were going wrong and I couldn't seem to find solutions. But I know that this happens from time to time for every quilter. And so I felt like it's important for you to see that, as well as to see the bright, shiny, pretty quilts and the days that go well. So it's all out there, the good, the bad, and the sometimes a little bit ugly. So that's what Live and Unscripted is all about. Replays always stand, and you get to come back and watch them as often as you wish. And I try to go back in and add chapters. So if you're looking for specific things, that hopefully you're able to find them. Okay. A few more things before we dive into the quilting. A few places that you can find me. One is on my website, stitchedbysusan.com, and you can find information there on things that I teach or things that I offer. And as I do more traveling, I'll be airing my schedule there, so you can find that as well. And there is a link, I trust, on the screen for that. I'm not really sure. Mr. Producer's doing other things. So, and just a brief moment here. The website is brand new. It actually, the new one just went live yesterday. So not everything is working perfectly yet. And in particular, the big photo that's the focal point of the home screen is not showing up. So bear with us while we work with that a little bit. But the information is all there, and we're working on this daily, and it's up and coming, and hopefully this website will be easier to use and be a good representation of what I do. Okay, that's the website. Also, I do have a podcast, and you can find all those episodes at podcast.stitchedbysusan.com. And to date, they have been mostly interviews with other quilters, and you can find them both where you listen to podcasts, and I'm also gradually uploading them into YouTube. So if you're a YouTube watcher and you like to have that on while you're working in your studio, there's a playlist called Podcast on my YouTube channel. So that's a good place to find them there. What else do we want to talk about? I know what else. I've got a coffee in hand. How could I forget? YouTube, of course, is always free and always accessible. But if you do care to support the show, you can do that at buymeacoffee.com stitched by Susan. And a lot of you are very faithful and generous supporters, and I so appreciate that. Every dollar that you give goes to upgrading our equipment. We've recently had a huge lighting upgrade. That was due to all of you. And so Mr. Producer has added at the end of the show rolling credits, and the members are listed there. So hang on to the end if you've been a contributor and see if you can find your name there as a member. So you can do either a one-time as little as $5 donation, or if you wish, you can choose a regular monthly coffee and cream fund, we call it. So keeps me in coffee and keeps our studio getting better and better, we trust. So have I covered everything, Mr. Producer? I want to give a few thanks to those who contribute to the show. Mr. Producer, obviously, I absolutely could not do this without him. Oh, he's sitting in the shadows over there. Yeah, there's a lot that goes into making these live streams happen with multiple cameras and views and etc. And the links and the cool credits and things that he runs on the screen, that's all due to my husband Dave. So a huge thanks for that. Also, our son Will does the voices, the little intros at the beginning of all these shows. And so thanks to Will for that. And last but not least, our good friend Dan, who provides the guitar music that you hear throughout. He is such a gifted musician, and it's just so wonderful and restful and calming and even creative and inspiring to listen to. So thanks to Dan for that great music. Okay, let's get quilting, you guys. For those of you who are Pinky and the Brain watchers, this is my Jimmy Brain No Spill coffee mug. I had to be sure it would not drip down my chest, right? Let's get quilting. Okay. So the first thing that I want to talk about is the backing of this quilt. And I've got a photograph for you of the whole backing so that you can see it. I think I want to be on this side. Yes. There's a photo coming. Bear with us a second. There we go. I tried to capture the whole thing for you, and you can see I've got a big pleat in it because it's long and I couldn't get it all in the camera. But you can see Joan, who is in charge of this project, took all the scraps and bits of fabric that she received and put them into this pieced backing, and she says she used every little scrap. So you can see that there's differences top and bottom, and this big stripe is somewhat offset. So I wanted to think through how that's going to appear on the back of my quilt. So for starters, I determined I want a quilt with that stripe running up and down so that I can visibly see it at the top when I'm loading my quilt, and I can place my quilt, you know, from left to right on it in a way that's most pleasing to me. And there's only about 4 inches of excess, which is plenty enough. I don't mean to say only like Joan cut it too short, but I know that there's 4 inches top and bottom that can be trimmed off. So I've tweaked it a little bit so that I know where you can see this top edge. This is a 2.5 inch piece. I'm going to place my quilt so that that piece is actually going to get trimmed off, and you can see it on the end closest to you in the photograph as well. Does that make sense? So I'm going to place my quilt upwards just a touch, just so that those pieces get snipped off, and then the bottom, it will fall where it may at that darker end where there's kind of more, because I can't control within an inch or inch and a half of where it's going to land exactly through the course of this quilt. It may migrate just a touch. So that gives me that wiggle room, if you will. I'm sure there are ways to do that absolutely precisely. I don't do that kind of precise quilting as a rule, so for my purposes, this is good enough. But just that thinking through beforehand of where it's going to land, how I want to arrange my backing, and where I want to place my quilt top. Okay, Mr. Producer is asking, those of you that ask questions throughout the show, and you're more than welcome to do that, would you put the letter Q in front of it? It enables him to search for them by searching for everything with a Q. Because as comments start coming in the hundreds, it's hard to go back and find them. So that way he can find the questions. We'll do our best to answer as many as we can. I chat as I'm doing this process, and I try and take pauses every now and again to answer all those questions, and yeah, just to answer them. So put your questions in there. I'm great with that, and we'll answer as many of them as we can between the quilting process. So let's get loading. I've got my red snappers all ready today. My loading system is fairly simple because I do not center the backing or even the top of the quilt. All that's important to me is that I have a straight edge at the front edge facing me. I need a straight edge to begin with, and I'm just going to start loading from one side and load till I get to the other. And you will see how I get a straight backing on here without any centering or careful placement. It's very easy. But this front straight edge is critical. Another thing that Joan did very well on this backing, and that I've kind of added to because this backing's been hauled around a bit and through the mail and so forth, because there is these high contrast fabrics and there's a black being attached to a white, we were very careful to pick off any of the loose threads that were in that seam allowance that's running this way, because they would show through. Just got to keep that front edge straight. And you can see how I'm kind of pinning or anchoring it with my left hand, and once I'm confident this edge is straight, then I just go back and snap in my snapper. This is not a selvage edge, so I'm being very careful to let my fabric relax and not pull it or stretch it. Because it's not selvage, it could stretch, and I don't want it to. And as I roll it up, I'm going to be watching for little dark errant threads, and I see one right now, and we'll just get that off right away. Okay, next step in this loading then is to put the rest of the backing over the long arm rails, all the way over, and then I'll walk around to the other side. I'm just going to lock Stella in place out of the way. Stella is my long arm's name. Okay, so I pull the backing all the way over, and this is key. Again, with no measuring and no centering, you've got to have other means of keeping it straight, right? And the check is, are there no creases? So watch if I pull this a ½ an inch to one side. Do you see how diagonal creases start forming? That's what I want to avoid. When it is perfectly smooth and none of those creases are showing, then I know I've got it straight. From there, I come around to my front side again. Sometimes I remember to undo my clips the first time I walk around. Sometimes I have to make another trip. And now I can start cranking it onto my front roller. And you can see that it's rolling on relatively smooth. This is a great example because it's a pretty big backing. But what's happening is, because this fabric is coming over the canvas leader, there's a little bit of resistance there, and that is keeping this rolling on with the straight of grain. It's not rolling faster in some areas than others, but it's up to me to still make sure no creases are forming, and I sometimes do, with a larger back, have to smooth that out from time to time. And then I keep on rolling. And I just keep rolling until I'm seeing that farthest edge approaching the edge of my leader. Let me just get to where I can see all the way across. And I do have some creases forming where this piecing is, because there's a lot of seams there. So I'm just going to smooth it out. And as we put some tension on this, I'm confident that this will come straight. It's just because there's a lot of seams. I'm actually going to get my spray bottle. Because the longest seams are running vertically, they're pulling a little bit tight. I'm going to spritz it just a touch to make it relax. Just a little. And I'm going to stretch those out just a bit. Just a touch. Okay. And now I'll come around to the back side. I keep one of my magnetic bars on this end, and I use it kind of like a pin. I just drop it on there to anchor things in place. And I feel like I need to smooth a little bit out to the left. I'm trying to evenly space out any of those wrinkles that are appearing. That looks good. And that magnetic bar just kind of acts like a pin and holds that end from flopping off altogether on me. That's a bit of a process. Then you have to unroll it and start smoothing it out again. Oh my goodness. We don't want that. So again, I'm placing my red snapper anchoring it with my left hand, and then clamping it with my right hand. And just like that, we have a loaded backing. Now, I have a little nifty trick for you guys. You can probably see, due to the piecing stripe that's happening here and the slight unevennesses, you know, in the fabric tension, I've got a little bit of a sag here. Can you see that? There's a little bit of a dip. Here's the easy trick. I'm pretty confident my backing was square and loaded straight. So what I'm going to do is unroll it onto my first roller. Maybe unroll was not the right word. Then I'm going to reverse the process, and I'm keeping a bit of tension on both of these rollers as I'm doing it. And basically all I'm doing is spreading out that little bit of excess and putting a little tension that's almost, I hesitate to say stretching that pieced part, but it is doing that just fractionally, just a little bit, because those seams were wanting to pull up tight. And I am happy with that. Let me get my leader through here. Great. We have a loaded top. Now, we have a loaded bottom. That's right, Mr. Producer. He knows what he's talking about here. We have a loaded backing. Now, we get to talk batting. A couple thoughts about this. So, the first thought is, this is 100% wool batting because it's my own quilt. It's going to be my couch quilt. I want it to be cozy. But I did for a moment consider this because the fabric of the what am I trying to say? The background fabric of the quilt is white. And the batting is unbleached, so it's quite creamy. There is a certain amount of creamy you know, that is imparted to the quilt top just because, this way, sorry guys. Just because the batting shines through just a little bit. So maybe nobody but a quilter would even notice that. But if I wanted a crisp white quilt, I wouldn't use this. I would have used bleached white batting because then it's as white as my quilt top. But in my case, because it's my quilt, I don't mind if it has that slightly antiqued look, just a touch. And so I've opted to go ahead with the wool batting. Jana's asking, what batting do you prefer? Well, Jana, I think my usual batting is the Hobbs 80/20. That's what you see me do the most often, for sure. Wool is a little more fiddly in that you have to wash it at a lower temp. You know, you don't want to put it in a hot dryer or it will massively shrink. But for my purposes, I know how to take care of it, and I love the feel of wool. So even though it's a little more expensive, it is my choice for my quilts. I love wool. It's a little bit more lofty, it's very lightweight, and it just has such a great light feel. So that's the batting, and here comes the quilt. So you can see what I mean by the high level of contrast. The border is this black print with bright colored stars on it. Love it, love it, love it. And then because it's a sampler quilt, not sampler, but a friendship quilt, and so all different people pieced the squares. They're all different fabrics, but mostly bright colors on this white background. So what thread to use was a question, and I decided fairly early on I was going to go ahead and use my eggshell for the bulk of the quilting. It's just slightly off of white. Again, because my quilt is going to look slightly off white, it's a great choice. Even if my quilt was white, it's a great choice. It kind of takes on the color of the quilt very subtly. But because this quilt has such a distinct border, and the border is very dark fabric, I hemmed and hawed. Like, one way would just be to quilt the whole thing edge to edge, which is kind of what I love doing in terms of quilting, but I thought this would be a great opportunity to show you a slightly different way, which is not quite custom, but is just a little more special. And that is, I'm going to go ahead and stitch in the ditch inside this border as I work my way down the quilt. And I'm going to fill the center with my all over design. And I'm going to quilt piano keys on this outer edge. I think it will add an awesome frame. It allows me to use a different color thread rather than the white on this very dark charcoal, almost black. And just in every way, I think that's a good, I think it's a good choice. So it's not necessarily the only choice, it's just the way that I choose. I love piano key borders because I think they frame a quilt so beautifully, and I'll probably do something like 1-inch spacing. So piano key just means there's going to be straight lines running across the border from the center to the outer edge, and I'll probably miter them in some way on the corners. So as we quilt today, I don't know that I'll get to doing that piano key border. Although you guys can chime in if you want to. If you'd rather see a sampling of the all over quilting inside, a sampling of stitching in the ditch, and then a sampling of that border, we could fit that all in. I definitely will not finish the entire quilt. And in general, if I was doing this in an efficient way at home and not doing it on live TV, the way I would do it is I would baste as I usually do with each pass. And in addition, I would quilt this stitch in the ditch line and fill in the edge to edge. And I would do that for each pass all the way down. My border would then be secured both inside and out, and it's only 6 inches wide, maybe only 5.5. And then I would come back and do the whole border all at once at the end because it's a thread change color. That's the process I would follow. But for today's purposes, we could do a sampling of all of the above. So let me know in the comments kind of what you'd prefer to see. Meantime, let's get basting. There are some questions, and I need a drink. That was a workout, putting such a big quilt on. And trying not to puff into the microphone. Okay, Connie, do you use a leveler bar or is your backing bar set lower? If so, how does that work with the bulk as you advance? Can we show the rail for a minute, Dave, from the side camera? So I do have a leveler bar, Connie. It's down below, so my quilt is running under that. And the bulk is winding up on this roller, so it does not make any difference. As that fills up, that does not make any difference the rate at which it's going under the leveler bar. And that is different from quilt machine brand to brand, depending. My Gamel, I used to have to raise and lower that take-up bar. Marlene, because you use the wool, does the stitching have to be closer? Probably yes, Marlene, but I'm in no danger of it being too far apart in any event. I never quilt 6 or 8 or 10 inches apart, not even 4. So there's no danger of it at all. I'm sure if you want to make much, much, much looser quilting, you would want to read their recommendations, but I don't have to worry about it because I'm quilting closer anyways.
It's overwhelmingly for sample.
Okay. Mr. Producer is saying overwhelmingly the vote is for sampling. Okay, so we'll do that. So that means we'll have a thread change in here. That's great. Get some different topics in. Okay, do we have more questions or are we on our way?
We're on the way.
We are on our way. All right. So first thing I'm going to do is baste. You all, I know, have heard me say this before, but I'm going to say it again. Basting to me is an always step. It is non-negotiable. It stabilizes everything. It establishes the square quality of the quilt. It is essential. Sometimes I put my channel locks on. Sometimes, as in today's case, I don't. Reasons for not doing it today. The quilt is beautifully square. Joan already has it very square and flat. There aren't multiple seam allowances on the edges that are, you know, falling open that I'm having to fiddle with. There's just nice, long, straight edges. So I just visually laid the quilt on nice and flat, lined it up with my top red snapper, and I'm just basting it in place as is. You can see with my left hand, I'm putting just a tiny, tiny bit of tension or pressure on what's already quilted. If I don't, this tends to want to push out in front of me, particularly because I have a wool batting and it's puffy. My hopper foot pushes it just a little in front of me. So just this little tiny bit of push on the area that's already quilted just pulls it under the needle a smidge faster and keeps it from getting out of hand. And again, that's pretty much something I do with every quilt. It's not something you have to do when it's uneven and wavy. It's just something you have to do, even with flat, to keep it going under the needle. Beautifully smooth. And I see this side is just a little bit higher, so I'll tug it down a touch. And I just go slowly so I can make those adjustments as I stitch. Make sure my right side is nice and horizontal. You'll see as I go over it, Joan was kind enough to put a little bit of stay stitching right here over every seam that's in this border, just so that those seams can't pull open. That is so incredibly helpful. Another way to do that if you're a quilt piecer is to make your seams, especially ones that are going to be on the edge, on the perimeter of the quilt, to make them with a much shorter stitch, like a 2.0, and that too helps those seams from coming undone and stretching looser. And I was using a basting stitch at 1/4 inch. That's my current favorite. But sometimes I do the basting just in my regular stitch as well. Just whatever's handy at the moment. It's all going to get hidden in the binding. No one's going to know. It's just for my purposes of keeping the quilt nice and flat. So it's entirely up to me which way I do it. Alrighty, last few steps. I'm loading my clamps onto the side. These are also by Red Snapper. I believe they call them E-edge clamps. And I do have a link in the description below this show. What I love about these clamps is how long they are, so that I get this tension on the whole side of my quilt as opposed to individual narrow clamps pulling on it. So there are other clamping systems that do the same thing, that have long clamps. That's what I would look for if I was you. And I do love these in particular. I have a 24-inch throat, so I have, I think, 19-inch clamps, but they do come in smaller sizes, I believe 16 and 12. So whatever size fills up most of your throat space. Okay, quilt is loaded. So some more of my magnetic bars. Which camera am I on? This one. These are just hardware store variety bars, the type you would put in your garage or shop to hang tools on, or perhaps in your kitchen to hang implements on, and they just clamp onto my front rail. And I should add here too, I am using my own adapted method of loading, not the one that was taught by Bernina. Usually they advise you to roll your backing up on this front rail right here, and the top of your quilt is rolled on that bottom rail. I choose to amend it so that I've only got one layer of fabric here. I don't want to roll my backing up on this front rail because I want to be able to use my magnets, and they don't work as well if you have multiple layers, as you can imagine. So I roll my backing on that bottom rail, and I don't roll my top, my quilt top, on at all. It's floating. It's all hanging right here until I work on it. But this is how my basting on 3 sides and my magnets on a 4th side secure this. So it's not going anywhere anyways. So I've accomplished the same purpose, just in a different way. Alrighty. I am going to undo this one clamp. I am going to undo that one clamp because I need my ruler base in order to edge stitch. So this is another reason, guys, why for practical purposes, if I was working on this quilt, I would, that doesn't really work. Sorry, erase that thought. I didn't think that all the way through. I do need the ruler on, the ruler base on, in order to quilt with the ruler. And now I'm going to find that it's going to shorten up my throat space just a little bit, but that's okay. Let me grab my ruler, and then there's a couple questions about that loading process that we'll take and go from there. Okay, questions? Are we on the front camera? Yeah. Kathy, is there an advantage to using side clamps or no side clamps when basting? I assume is what you mean. I put my side clamps on, Kathy, after basting. That's my personal preference. I feel like I'd rather baste my layers together when there's no tension on them. And then when I do put the side tension on, it's on all layers equally. That's my personal preference. I know there are quilters who stretch the back first and then put the top on, I feel like they're unequal at that point. The back is stretched more. My thoughts. Jan, are you doing the basting or using channel locks? I do know that you can pretty much do a perfect straight baste without. I did not have my channel locks on, Jan. I was winging it. And I did talk about that a bit briefly if you want to go back and hear my reasons why later. Jackie, that's the same process I do. I struggle with each advance. Do not let wobbles get started that create folds and gaps in the unquilted borders. Want to glean some helpful ways to get better. Okay, we'll talk about them as we go, Jackie. That's the beauty of kind of doing a sampler of the quilting. What did you do with Bernina clamps? Did you connect your E to E clamps onto the Bernina clamp cords? So I do that at the end. With one of my passes, Jan, I'm sure you'll be able to see that. I still have the single Bernina clamp that snaps onto my E to E cord and pulls it snug. You have to have something to pull that cord snug. And I use the Bernina clamp for that. That's it for questions. Okay, here's my favorite ruler, you guys, my current favorite. Some of you who've been watching a long time saw me using an A1 yellow, greeny yellow ruler a while back. It doesn't seem to be available anymore, so I went looking for a replacement. This one is by Jamie Wallen of Quilter's Apothecary, and I learned that he was the person that actually developed that yellow one, so no wonder this suits me to a T. What I love about it is the handle that's on it, and you'll see as I'm quilting how great that is for grasping. It does come in different lengths. This is an 8-inch. I like the 8 because even though I could get a much longer ruler, I can't hold a longer ruler down perfectly. So this is the right length to quilt along it and move, and quilt along it and move for me. So still with my eggshell thread on, I'm going to now stitch in the ditch just on the inside of this border. So Joan has pressed the dark seam allowance toward the dark fabric. So I've actually got a ditch on the white side, which is exactly what I want. So while I do this, because it's slowish, let me tell you a few more details about the products I'm using. So first off, I'm stitching on a Bernina Q24. And I am using stitch regulation. And I have my stitch length set on 10 right now. I'm using Isocord 100% poly thread in an eggshell color. If you want the exact color, it's 0101. And those little red lights, in case you wonder what they are underneath there, that's actually the cameras. There are 2 cameras in the throat plate of the Berninas that are reading the movement of my fabric over the top of them and regulating the stitches to 10 per inch. So that's what the little red lights are, is those little cameras active. You can see how this length of ruler is rather perfect. If it was much longer, I'd have to shift my hand position anyway. So my thinking then is, why use that longer ruler and just be dealing with something big and unwieldy. Now I do use that bigger one in different circumstances. There are some times when I do appreciate having that long edge accessible to me. But for most of my purposes, an 8 or 9 inch ruler is the perfect size. So this is my initial establishing of both the shape for the edge to edge that's going to be inside, and also for stabilizing this border. Because as you can see now, the basting has stitched on one side of it, this has stitched on the other side of it, so that whole border is pretty firmly in place now. It can't go far for this particular pass. And every time I start a new pass, I will, gauge it to make sure there's no rippling or stretching going on. Here's another tiny hint. Can we see this in the camera? We sure can. See my little thread tails here? Generally, I clip those right next to the quilt. I did some lock stitches, and then I clip them right next to the quilt, and they're done. But when I'm doing this stitch in the ditch, and it's kind of hard to see, I like to leave those little tails till I'm joining up with my next pass, just so I can easily see where I stopped. So I'll trim them off when I come back here later. So now, we have a couple of choices, and I'm just thinking them through. I think because you want to see a sampling, I'm going to take a couple questions if there are any, and then I'm going to go ahead and work on the border, because then I'm going to advance a little bit. I don't have very much. Do you want to show my side camera here again, Mr. Producer, sir? Here we go. You can see I don't actually have very much quilting space here before I'm going to hit this front rail, especially because I have the ruler plate on. So let's go ahead and quilt some border area. So first we'll change thread. Let me talk about thread for half a second before I change it. In thinking through what threads I wanted to put on this, keep in mind that the backing, the back of the quilt, is mostly white. It's 80% white, and then a bit of those pieced areas. So I felt like to use black thread. This is hardly even black, it's just a very deep charcoal. To use black thread is so stark on the back. So I opted to go even lighter than this charcoal by a shade or two. So I've got a charcoal gray thread for the front of my quilt. And what I chose for the backing is a couple shades lighter of gray. So they will work together well so that I don't get, you know, eyelashing or needle holes showing on the front of a vastly different shade of thread. They're close enough. Can you see that? But this is so much more pleasing to the eye on that white quilt than a stark gray, and certainly than a stark black. So that's what I've chosen, top and bottom, for doing this border. So let's thread the top. Let's do, Dave, if we could, a front shot here, and maybe that will show the threading process a little bit. I did mention my Bernina is named Stella, didn't I? The front shot. Oh, head cam, I'm sorry. Head cam is what you mean on the foot. My head. A front shot. Yes, I was right the first time, you guys. No. A full shot so they can see the machine. Yeah, there we go. So you can kind of see my threading process a little bit here, right? So here's one of my tips for you. And you've probably heard this from sewing machine dealers before, but I'm going to reiterate it. Clip your thread somewhere near your spool and actually pull it out from the needle end, rather than pull it backwards through the needle. The reason for that is the little tension spring that is on your machine that the thread goes through is it's a very fine wire, and it's quite fragile actually. And if you yank your thread backwards through that, you raise your chances of actually breaking that spring and having to replace it. Does it happen very often? No, it sure doesn't. 99 times out of 100 it'll work. But for that 100th time, if you break the spring, you'll be really annoyed. So the way to ensure that that doesn't happen is to go ahead and pull that thread through the front. So sewing machine people will tell you exactly the same thing. That is just really, really important. And by the way, you may or may not care, but my needle threader, somehow I bent the wire last week, so I currently have no needle threader. I'm back to doing it the old-fashioned way. Okay, top thread is dark gray. Now I'm going to change my bobbin thread, and then we'll take a couple comments. So I'm just reaching under and grabbing my bobbin. I'm sure you can't see all of this, so I'll tell you what I'm doing. I've got some bobbins preloaded. And I will go ahead and check my tension, because I don't want any tension problems on this. And I was mentioning earlier that a few weeks back I had had so much tension difficulties with my machine, and I'm happy to say we've got them resolved. But the one thing it did was help me to form the good habit, really, of checking my bobbin tension much more often. I used to, and I sometimes do, still trust to knowing how it should look on the front, you know, using my fingernail underneath, and that's all well and good. But I check a lot more often than I used to. Okay, questions? I can't see the screen. Okay, the screen is coming. Mr. Producer's doing work on the side. Whoop. Here we are. Okay. Jan, yep, you're good at straight stitching, Susan. I think you're the straight stitch whisperer. I love straight stitching, actually. I do. Barb, do you ever use your channel lock for the ditch across the top? Frequently, Barb. Especially if I've got a quilt that's got wavy borders or lots of seams that intersect it or anything that's a bit fiddly to work with. Absolutely, I do. That's one thing that is just under control then, as I have a straight line. But for this one, the fabric, the edge was very nice and straight. Jana, how much of the quilt do you baste? Only as much as is exposed in my current pass, Jana. And sometimes that changes with more custom quilting, but for the purposes of this one or my everyday edge-to-edge quilting, just as much of it as is exposed for that first pass. Savannah, for the border, are you using 60 weight in the bobbin? No, at the moment, Savannah, I've got the same weight of isocord thread, which is a 40 weight, 100% poly, got the same type of thread, both top and bottom. You certainly could use 60 weight or even an 80 weight in the bobbin if indeed you had that handy, but I don't. So this works. Jenny, question about the advanced membership. Will access to older material be allowed or just for material added after the membership starts? Thanks. That's a great question, Jenny. The membership works this way. Every month I'm putting new content, new lessons into it under different course headings like freehand designs or like guest presenters. But all of it is accessible, and what the membership purchases for you is access to everything. So as long as you're paid up, you have access to everything. Soon as you stop paying, you have access to nothing. So it's different from my masterclass in that sense. The masterclass, once you purchase it and own it, you have access for always. It doesn't, come and go. The membership buys access, and you get access to everything for whenever you're paid up. The masterclass, just to be clear, is a separate online course. The advanced membership is strictly the monthly content membership, and it's all different stuff than is in the masterclass. Not necessarily more advanced, but often more custom, more unique, that sort of thing. I don't want to spend too much time on that because I want to get quilting. So poor Mr. Producer, his mouse died while we were talking, so he's plugging in power to that, and I'm gonna get on quilting. He can't change the scene. He's busy fixing his mouse. So no mouse traps here. Really, I did not set a trap. But I'll be right back showing you my next tool that I'm gonna use. Do you want mine from upstairs? Okay, you guys. This is one of my favorite tools. You know I'm the queen of frugal, right? Trying to get one out of here. I know I have a sharpened one in here. I'm looking for school chalk, right? It's my favorite marking tool. And I have a short one, nicely sharpened up. There it is. Whew! Okay, here's how this tool goes. I have a piece of school chalk, white, and always white, by the way, because it has no waxes or colors in it that could possibly stick to your fabric. So white is a good choice. I like this chalk for marking because it's super inexpensive and super accessible to all of us and brushes off easily, but it is not hyper precise. So I have sharpened the end, you can kind of see that, in a pencil sharpener, but it still is a roundish edge. But for today's purposes, because this is not hyper precise, it's the perfect marking tool. Works well on a dark fabric. So what I'm going to do, which Mr. Producer can't show you.
Yes, you can now.
Oh, he can now. Oh, look at that.
Questions before I do it, and they pertain, so.
Oh, he says he's got more questions. Okay, coming back for questions.
This is one you'll appreciate.
Joan, just now able to join. So excited to see this quilt top under your needle. Is the top flat and square, or don't I want to know? LOL. Joan is the lady who made this all happen, who coordinated all the students and friends and got their squares and then assembled the whole quilt top. And Joan, it's beautifully flat. It's a pleasure to quilt, for sure. More questions are coming. Anne, when do you use 80 weight for bobbin instead of 40 weight? Actually, Anne, I love 80 weight. I would use it most of the time if I could, just because you can fit so much more on a bobbin and it makes fewer bobbin changes. I don't have very many colors in it though, so it's not always practical. But a good reason to use it too is if you had to have a highly contrasted backing, which I do have today, and then your thread is quite contrasty, using the 80 weight makes that contrast show up less just because the thread is finer, right? So lots of good reasons for using 80 weight. It just does come in limited colors generally. Jan, how do you check back tension? What's it, with its feel, or do you lift the front bar? I seldom lift the front bar, Jan. That's just me. I do it by either my observance of what the stitches look like on the top of the quilt. I'm pretty attuned to what that should look like. And also you can run your fingernail firmly against that back stitching, and if there's laddering at all, you'll feel that. But slight tension off edges, you won't feel with your fingernail. You'll have to see it. So sometimes I literally crawl under my machine with my iPhone and the flashlight. I don't have a hydraulic lift, so I can't get it up high enough really to lift my bar and see under it easily, but sometimes I crawl right under. That's how I do my calisthenics. Okay, that's it for questions. Alrighty, so back to the head cam. This is what Mr. Producer calls the head cam. Got to get my terms right. Okay, you can see me here. Yeah, so I'm just going from, I'm trying to show you the whole thing. I'm just going from corner to corner of the 45-degree angle of this border, and I'm going to drop a chalk line in there, and I have to move my frame. I know you can't see it, I'm sorry. I've got to get the ruler plate out from under so that I can draw across it, but I'll show you what I've done in a sec. Okay, there's my chalked line. All right, so that's going to enable me to make my piano keys miter like this. You certainly could have piano keys running this way and then start in this corner and have piano keys running this way, because there is a seam here, but I like the mitered look, so that's what I choose. From there, you have a couple choices depending on your level of OCD, I guess. You certainly can take the time to mark them all on, and that would be hyper precise. Or you can do what I do, which is use your ruler markings, and I call that close enough. The closer spaced my piano keys are, the more I lean toward marking, because any unevennesses show when they're only, 3/8 or half an inch apart, for example. But when they're a whole inch, you can get away with a lot and it still looks just fine. So I eyeball it. But I am going to start with the seam that Joan has sewn in the border, because that is a perfect 90-degree. I'm putting my yardstick under my side ruler so that my ruler plate does not hit this frame right here. I'm just going to show you guys that in case you haven't seen it before. Here's my ruler plate. You can't see. Oh, you can't see anyways. I'll move over further so you can. Here's my ruler plate, and it bumps into this if I just let my quilt relax. But when I put my yardstick on and lift this white portion up, then my ruler plate can slide under there freely. So yardstick, curtain rod, anything that's straight that will lift that up a little bit is key. Let's get started stitching, you guys. I'm doing a lot of talking and not much quilting. Okay, did Susan not put the bobbin in? Surely I did. I'm not getting a bobbin thread. It must have just cut off too short. Yep, that's what it is. Pull a little bit longer tail. It gets very difficult with clamp, yardstick, ruler, all the things to reach under there. So a few lock stitches, and we're up and away. So I'm stitching in the ditch of that seam that was in the border, and then I'll do 90-degree angles. And I'm not going to attempt to space my lines like the print in the quilt, but I am going to use it for a visual aid for keeping them straight. And I'm just going to change my stitch regulation. For those of you that use Berninas, the BSR number 1 has this little coasting feature that keeps it stitching ever so gently and slowly, even when I've stopped. And the BSR 2 stops. When I hold still like that, it stops. That's what I want for ruler work, honestly. Did I get those first piano keys perfectly spaced? No, I did not. But you know what? It's my quilt. As you do this just a little bit, you'll find that your eye starts to see that 1 inch, and it gets easier and easier. The direction that I'm moving now, it's going to be really easy because my ruler is on my left-hand side, and it's very convenient. As I stitch in other directions, it might not be as easy. And I might have to by guess and by gosh it. Or mark it. But you know me, I'm going to by guess and by gosh it. So I'm just traveling at this top end in the ditch. But as I'm doing it, I'm going to stop and pause Stella and show you how I'm making this decision and why. It's one I'm making on the fly, but you might run into this too. Okay, we've got the head cam look. Yes, Mr. Producer?
Yeah, we do it.
Okay, so stitching down here, traveling. So I was basically doing this zigzag up and across, down and across, etc. But can you see here how my dark gray thread is really showing up in that ditch? And here I don't love that, so I'm going to make an adjustment, and what I'm going to do actually is double stitch these piano keys. This is optional, absolutely optional, because I'm making the choice between now I'm going to have 2 layers of thread on every row, or I'm going to have these gray blurbs in the ditch. I choose the 2 layers of thread. You can choose whichever one suits you. So it basically means I'm going back and forth for each one and always traveling in that outer edge. But I just did not like the look of the gray in that ditch. So I'm going to give you guys a chance to chime in again. We have learned from experience. My camera is mounted on the left-hand handlebar, and when I'm holding that handlebar in quilting, there's a lot less vibration. And when I'm not holding it, as in the case of now when I'm doing ruler work, there's more vibration. So I'm going to do a few more piano keys, but if you find this vibration too much, you've seen the piano keys now, I can stop them and we can go on to the freehand quilting in the middle where I'll be hanging on to both handlebars. So let me know your preference. I'm good either way. So I'm actually using the 3/4 inch line on my ruler because remember the foot, the hopper foot is a 1/4 inch around the needle on all sides. So if I match my previous stitching line with the 3/4 inch line on the ruler, I am achieving 1 inch piano keys. And this is just that simple. As a rule, when I'm doing this, I'm simply using perhaps the seam lines in the quilt and certainly the red snapper and the quilt rails kind of in my peripheral vision to keep my ruler absolutely perpendicular because I'm not marking these right, so you don't want to gradually be slanting off like as though it was handwriting. But in the case of this border, it has these stars and they're very nicely on the straight of grain. And so I actually have a really good visual guideline right there for keeping them straight up and down. If those cues didn't feel like enough for you, and yet you still didn't want to mark them all in, you could just occasionally put in, with your marking tool, a vertical line. And every time you got to that vertical line, say every foot or something like that, you would kind of do a check-in. Am I still straight? Do I need to make some small adjustments? Are we getting any feedback about the vibration? If you're okay with the vibration, I'll go on to the other end. I'm not quite halfway yet, and show you how I space them when they don't quite come out evenly, as they never do. And how I kind of even that out at the end. And I know I've said to you a few times that this is real-time quilting, but the actual truth of the matter is if I did not have a camera on here and trying to reduce that vibrating, I would go a bit faster than this. But I'm trying to keep that vibration down for you. So while I do quilt though, in case you are just tuning in, this is a live and unscripted quilting show. It's real time. It's being streamed live from my quilting studio, and it is full on a reality show. Thread changes, thread breaks, tension issues, honest and open talking about decisions that I'm making and why, and even the ones that were wrong. That's all here. So if decisions are something that is really holding you up when you stand in front of your quilting machine, come on into my studio and let's talk through stuff as we do it. Like and subscribe, share with your friends who are also into quilting. It's all a great thing. And if you're looking for some easy listening, check out my podcast. It's called Measure Twice, Cut Once. It is mostly interview based, so talking with other quilters and crafters about their stories, the differences their craft has made in their life. All of those episodes can be found at podcast.stitchedbysusan.com, and many of them can now be found on my YouTube channel, Stitched by Susan, under the playlist podcast. And I'm gradually putting them in YouTube because I'm able to put the captions with them there. And so I thought for some of you that might be an enjoyable way of listening/reading these interviews. Also, if you're interested in supporting this show, you can go to buymeacoffee.com/Stitched by Susan. You can make as little as a single $5 one-time contribution, or if you wish, there is a membership option there, and every dollar that we receive there goes directly toward upgrading our equipment levels in an effort to always get better. A recent upgrade was the lighting you're seeing in the last couple shows. Everything is so much brighter, and we have a new camera on the close-up shots, which hopefully is super duper clear. So we appreciate all of you, and if you want to see your name up in lights, wait till the end of the show. All of the members' names are featured there in the rolling credits. So a quick rundown again on the equipment I'm using. I'm stitching on a Bernina Q24. All of today's work is either with a ruler or freehand. Her name is Stella. And yeah, we spend a lot of time together, so we're good friends. She's got to have a name and a personality. I'm using Isocord 100% polyester thread. Mostly I'll be stitching in eggshell, but right now I have kind of a battle gray on the top and a lighter gray on the bottom, and it is a 40 weight thread. Many of you ask if that is embroidery thread, and in fact, yes it is. So Isocord initially developed their thread for machine embroidery, but it's perfectly suited for long arm use too, because it was developed with high speed in mind. And so, though I'm not an embroidery machine, yet the same requirements of the thread hold true. Low lint, strong, so that I can stitch at high speeds, and it doesn't gum up my bobbin. So I really love 100% polyester thread. And I have the same brand of thread, although a slightly different shade, loaded in the bobbin right now. And you guys, don't let me start on the main part of the quilt without changing my thread back over to the eggshell, okay? So this show, being live, is also interactive. Feel free to type in questions concerning what I'm doing. Precede it, if you would, with the letter Q. That enables Mr. Producer to search for all the Qs whenever I get to a stopping place and stop to chat and read them. So we're approaching the corner. I've got about 12 inches left on this side. As I get within 5 or 6 inches, I'll show you how I start kind of messing with my spacing to even them out to meet correctly at the corner. I want my mitered piano key edges to hit right at the point of the white inner part of the quilt. And I would say we're about there. So we'll just pause. And I'm going to grab my chalk, and I'm going to grab a ruler that's got inch markings on it. Probably the side cam. Yeah, you guys can't see it well on my close-up because it's parked. So I'm just looking at this. Stella is right in the way. Let me see. Yeah, still can't see it. Okay, just a moment. I will move Stella. I do want you to be able to see this. This is something that one has to do frequently. Now we can see it on the side cam, and I think that's the best one. So see this space here. Here's my last line, and here's the point that I want to end up at. This seldom seems to work out just right. So what I do when I'm close-ish to it like this. I've got just over 5 inches there. There's about 5 and almost a quarter. What I'm going to do is drop markings that are just a little over an inch so that I space out that difference. I'm going to make the last 4 or 5 be a little bit larger. And that's going to make it look like it's all the same, rather than having it all taken up in the very last one that would then be huge, or I'd have to squeeze in a little one. Does that make sense? So now we'll start again with Stella, and I'm just going to use those chalk markings for my ruler placement. Keeping in mind that I'm stitching a 1/4 inch away from the ruler, so therefore I will hold my ruler a 1/4 inch away from the chalk marking. And you'll see the chalk marking, I think, when I get to the front. There it is, right over it. And I need to take a sec and put my 45-degree line on here. I forgot that while I was in here with my chalk. A little tricky with my ruler in place, or with my plate in place, but I think I can get it. Good enough to see? Great. And by the way, if those of you who are watching have a gamma elevate or above, you can program one of your buttons to be the channel lock. So you can move to a line placement. I'll show you. Like this. You can move to a line, hit the channel lock button, go down, go back up, release the channel lock button. It's really cool. And if that didn't all make sense, ask someone in a Facebook group or someone else that's got a similar machine. But because you've got the button push channel lock, and because on elevates and above, the buttons are programmable, you can turn that on. And of course, when you're going down the side of your quilt, then you put the horizontal one on instead of the vertical one. The click of a button. Here's where you see my handle on my ruler coming in handy when I'm changing position of the ruler as I'm going around these corners. I just have multiple ways to grasp it and hang on to it and put pressure on it. I love rulers with handles. And I'm just stitching to my chalked line, turning the corner, and then going on to the next one. Okay, that's it for border. If I were not anxious to get onto the edge to edge, I would go ahead and proceed. Have we got the bigger picture? We do. I would go ahead and proceed down this side as far as I could reach with my ruler coming down this way, and I would repeat it on the far left end, and that way my border would be done before I advance. But I did say to you at the beginning, if I had my druthers, if I was doing this at home with nobody watching, I would go ahead and quilt the whole thing, this whole central area, just doing my basting and my stitching in the ditch on the border, and I would come back and do the border all at the end with one thread change. Does that make sense? I don't see any point in going back and forth between the gray and the white, although you certainly can. You certainly can. But you've gotten a good sampling of the border, so we're going to drop that. Let me just, I probably don't have to declamp it, do I? Yes, I do, because I want to move forward a little bit. So I'm going to take everything off, and I will come to the middle then and answer a few questions before we change thread and go back to our edge to edging. I'm just going to take Stella to the other end and change that bobbin thread before I forget it, because I'm terrified that I will forget it, and start stitching with the gray in there. I did take the time this morning to pre-wind my bobbins so I was ready to go, but I do have an onboard bobbin winder, so it is certainly something that you can do while you're stitching very easily. It's just one extra noise when I'm on camera to have that bobbin winder going. Okay, let's see some questions. Let me grab my coffee cup, okay? My Jimmy Brain no spill coffee mug. And I'm standing well back from my quilt. I don't want to have any oopses. Mr. Producer says he knows the answer. Will you pick out and redo the piano keys that you didn't like? Nobody's going to see those 2 little 1-inch gray pieces in the scheme of the whole quilt, I don't think. Now, Tammy, if you come to my house, you might know to look for them, but yeah, no, I'm not going to. Joan, it's like watching my baby grow up, taking her first step as she grows up into a full-grown quilt instead of a quilt top. And I'll be sure and post pictures of not only the finished quilt, you guys, but the finished quilt on my couch, you know, with my cat sleeping on it, so you can see it all grown up and at home.
The next one is on the vibration of the camera.
Okay. Jan, when doing ruler work, is it to be expected to vibrate that much? I haven't started ruler work on my Bernina, but I'm going to start this week, hopefully. You know, Jan, I don't think you're going to notice it as the quilter. You're just seeing it on your end because we've got the camera plus an arm, etc., and that vibration kind of gets magnified by the time it gets to the camera, and we've taken all the measures we know to make it vibrate less, you know, anti-vibration pads, etc., etc. It's the best we can achieve on camera, but I don't think you have to worry about it at all in terms of the ruler. That's just the typical stitching vibration. It's not really any more when doing ruler work than when doing other work. It's just when I'm hanging onto both handlebars, that reduces it a bit too. And when I'm doing ruler work, of course, I'm not hanging on with my left hand onto the camera bar. Hope that all makes sense. Okay, Paula, maybe you covered this and I missed it, but is there a reason you load the bottom of the backing on the front side first and the top edge last? I only loaded it that way, Paula, because I wanted to control exactly where the top edge of my quilt was landing on the backing. So the quilt itself is square. There's not really a top and bottom or even a left and right side. I just picked the edge at the top that I wanted to control where the quilt ended up there and know how much was going to get trimmed off, just because that backing is pieced. And I didn't want like a teeny tiny bit of the dark black showing. Do you know what I mean? At the very edge. So this way I can control it. That's my only reason. Kathy, what needle brand do you prefer? What size are you using? At the moment, I have Schmetz loaded. Most commonly, I use a 90-14, but I think at the moment I have a jeans needle on because that's what I had on my last project and I didn't put a fresh one on this morning. Linda, where do you buy your thread? Linda, I order it wholesale directly from Amman USA, which is the manufacturer of Isacord. Apparently there's another question related to this. Oh, hang on a second. Okay, let's just move to the other one, hon. Okay, apparently the one camera's frozen. We're not sure what's going on there with the face on camera, but I'll answer that question again. Where do I get my thread? I currently buy it from Amman USA, which is the manufacturer of Isacord. I began by purchasing it on eBay. There's a good site there. There might be more than one, but I found a good site for a gentleman that offered it without shipping and with no minimum quantities at a really great price. So that's a good place to do it. If you're doing quilting as a business, check with any local store or even online stores if you can get wholesale pricing on it. And any of those things will get a better and better price for you. Okay, more questions? And I have to look at the other screen to get the questions. Okay, Diane, your previous ruler was yellow. Is the clear ruler easier to see where you've been? I don't honestly notice a difference, Diane. I don't. It's fine either way. Jan, do you use the backing stitch when you travel back so the needle always goes down in the previous stitch? Do you mean when I travel back on the piano keys? I didn't use a backing stitch there. I'm not sure what you mean, Jan. Like, I don't have a reverse stitch like a sewing machine would have on the long arm quilting machine, but when I'm beginning and ending my stitching, I do several stitches very close to each other. Hopefully that covered the question. Okay. And why not stitch bottom row of piano keys in dark fabric? Just because the ditch is honestly in the white, and I've already stitched in that ditch with white fabric. So though I could do that bottom edge in gray, then on the back of the quilt, I'm going to have those jogs that don't land in the ditch. Do you know what I mean? And the piano keys are gray going up and down, and my ditch stitching is white. So not as attractive on the back, in my opinion, but absolutely an option. Roxanne, do you ever knock off the side clamps with the ruler base? Yep. Many times. When I forget to put those yardsticks in there or think I can squeak by without needing them. Sue, how far are you from Seattle? About 5 hours, Sue. I'm almost on the Idaho borderline, state border. Alrighty then. So is our face on camera working yet or no?
That would be a negatory.
Oh gosh, we're frozen. Sorry about that, people. So you're not going to get much more of my face, are you? So what I'm doing now, first I'm moving Stella so that she is beside my red snappers, because I need my snappers to slide under the dead bar, under the leveler bar. That's the first thing I'm doing. And then I am advancing so that I can see as much as possible of this, whoops, got to undo my clamp, as much as possible of the edge-to-edge quilting that I'm going to be doing. Like so. Now, a couple things here. You're looking at my whole quilt, right? Yes. So first off, when I advance, every time I do this whole pinch thing, I don't always tell you guys because it's so automatic to me, both to tug my quilt down firmly, but I'm also grasping the batting in there. In my experience, left to its own devices, the batting tends to migrate up in the middle when I'm doing advances. So I always do that gentle tug, and I'm always kind of watching that the side of it is staying straight, right? And is not veering in. That's my gauge. And sometimes I have to zhuzh, my favorite word, a little bit of batting up on the edges. But that process of tugging it down in the middle helps. And by the way, if you've ever run out of batting on one edge or the other, watch the video that I just uploaded. I can't remember if it was yesterday or the day before. Catastrophe, my batting's too small. And I talk about how to make an adjustment for that as you're quilting and not have to piece in a little bit. Okay. But for this project, I have now advanced like 8 inches. So my basting is ending, you know, not quite at the bottom of my quilt. So I can either go back and baste or drop pins in there. What shall I do? I choose to go back and just quickly drop in that basting, then I know that it's done, and also drop in my ditch stitching. Before I start stitching though, I've got to change thread colors. Do you want to give me the question, Mr. Producer, and I can talk while I'm changing top threads? I don't see it. Jan, thought there was a setting so when back stitching the needle goes back into the stitching that you already did. I'm not 100% sure what you mean, Jan. Like I have a single stitch setting on my button, but I don't have any back stitching. I control where that stitch lands each and every time. I do. So I hope that helps. But I need to change top thread. So again, I'm snipping the thread close to my spool and lifting off my gray color, pulling the thread out through the needle end, through the needle direction, and not backwards. And we're reloading with the eggshell thread. I've already done it for the bobbin. And once again, if you're just chiming in, this is live and unscripted quilting, streaming live from my studio. If you're enjoying it, please, please hit the like and subscribe. If you click the bell, you'll be notified every time I do go live, which is about twice a month. Always on Friday and always at 9 a.m. Pacific time. So far. Semi-predictable. Also, feel free to sign up for my newsletter. That is where I give advance notifications of what the event is and let you know for sure the date. But I usually post a picture and some description of the topics that are going to be covered in a given event. Let's do the basting first. So newsletter is a great thing. I send them out generally just twice a month. So they're not trying to fill your inbox with stuff, but hopefully give you the information you're looking for and let you know what podcasts, what YouTube episodes, etc. are available. So you notice there, I didn't change my stitch length for the basting. I mentioned this earlier. There's no have to use basting stitch. It just goes a little quicker to have the long jumping stitches. But for my purposes today, it's quicker to just not take the time to change it. Some kind person is looking out for me and asking if I changed my bobbin thread. And yes, indeed, I did. I did that first so that I would not forget it. Okay, so we need to put side clamps on. On a quilt this size, I feel like the side clamps are pretty non-negotiable too. There are times when I shortcut and don't put them on, but that's usually on a very small quilt. Sometimes I've done whole cloth baby quilts on these episodes, and there's very little backing on the sides, and so I've sneaked by without it. But on a quilt this big, you really do want those side clamps to be sure that everything is smooth and flat. There's just a little bit of tension on the whole quilt. Beauty. Okay. Question on the batting. Teresa, when you tug on the batting, does it not distort it underneath? Well, Teresa, I don't think so. I think that not tugging on it, oh, we're working again. Yay! I think that not tugging on it does more distortion. This may just be my machine or perhaps the type of batting I use, but if I don't tug on it a little, it gets too much in the middle and it ends up pulling up and my sides end up coming in, and that happens to me consistently if I don't pull on it. If you're worried about it though, either flip your bar up if you've got one that flips, or if you float the tops like I do, flip the top up so that you can see it and know that it is smooth and flat. Are there more questions still, or keep going? Okay. So remember, you guys, I left these little tiny thread tails right in, oh gosh, it's like moving in a mirror. In my stitching in the ditch, remember I left these little tails just so I can see where I ended stitching there. So I'm cutting them now, and I'm adding my stitching in the ditch, and I overlap it by a little touchy touch. And you'll notice when I get to the bottom, I'll say that the other way. When I start, I'm doing 4 or 5 stitches in very close succession. They're all in less than 1/8 of an inch. That's my lock stitch to begin. So I'm actually using the 3/4 inch line on my ruler, because remember the foot, the hopper foot, as far as I can go against my bar. So I'm actually using the 3/4 inch line on my ruler to do a lock stitch, because remember the foot, the hopper foot, is when I start the next. So I'm actually using the 3/4. Overlap the stitching by about 1/4 of an inch, and that will serve as the lock, making a little bit less thread buildup on the back. Pull the tail out and see, there's my little tails again, so that I know exactly where I am for next time. I think we've got to edge stitch on one more side before I start. Yeah, we do. A little more edge stitching, and then we're going to get to our quilting design. Did I make you guys dizzy going across the top? Sorry about that. So again, I'm overlapping about 1/4 inch. This side I had not left little thread tails, but I will this time. So again, I've just gone till I bump, whoops. I didn't mean to put a lock stitch and I hit the wrong button. I meant to just end it there and do my overlap. It is so not the end of the world. But when you have different threads on the back than the color of the backing, then it might matter to you. I think we're ready. We're going to put our magnets on and we're going to start quilting. 1, 2, 3. And those of you who contributed squares will want to watch really closely in case you see your name go by. So now I'm going to start stitching in the corner. And frankly, I could start either in the right corner or the left corner. I don't know why. I tend to start in the top left. Sorry, that would be the top right. I'm right-handed, but for some reason this just feels comfortable to me. But it truly doesn't matter because we're going to end up going both directions. So whichever way feels comfortable for you to start, you go. I'm just looking back over it. Have I missed anything? I don't think so. Okay, we're ready to start quilting. I'm quilting today. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to do that. I'm so used to shifting my handlebars to whatever feels comfortable when I'm working, and I forgot the camera's attached. I can't like shift it about. Sorry about that. More? No, it's fine. Okay, get my thoughts in order. The design that I'm quilting today, I call plume. You've probably seen variations of it. This is my own personal take on it. It is one that I do teach fully in my freehand quilting masterclass. And I had thought about doing traditional all over feathers on this quilt because it's kind of a traditional styling. But I've done that one quite often lately, so this one is similar. It still has the feather shapes, but a little bit different. So this is what I landed on. I know that this one makes a lovely texture when the quilt is washed and when it shrinks up a little bit. And so I really want that look and feel, because this is going to be a quilt that I nap under and curl up under on the couch with a good book. Yeah, so I really want that look and feel of a well-loved, well-used quilt. And we have a thread break. What was that about? Not sure. Okay, here comes Susan's rule of thumb. When a thread break happens, because they do happen from time to time, the first time it happens, I just rethread my machine, pull up my bobbin thread, do those sorts of things and keep going. If it happens a second time, I start investigating more deeply, because then it's a habit, right? So I've rethreaded my needle. My bobbin thread has not been cut, right? So right now I'm going to take one stitch to pull up that bobbin thread. And I think I have found my problem. The bobbin is not flowing freely under there. So one thing at a time. First, we're going to undo a little bit on the top because it broke thread with a yank. And so that pulled the stitches kind of awkwardly. And also I like to do my splices at a corner whenever possible, so I'm just going to back up to the last point of one of these plume shapes. Yeah, the thread kind of frayed a little bit, so let's just back up. There, it's looking good. So I'm about 2 stitches beyond the point of this plume, so I'll start right in the point, overlap just a little bit. The reason for doing it in the point is, number one, it shows less because it's in a corner, but more particularly, it's more secure. Though the machine regulator, the stitch regulator is on, yet there are several small stitches that happen when you come to a halt at a point, and so those are nice and secure. So for me to start there is a good secure way to splice it. If I started in the middle of a plume, it would be less so. So now, next problem, we think we've narrowed it down to the bobbin, so let's have a look at the bobbin and see what's going on down there. Yes, I can feel that it's not flowing freely, and yes, indeed, the bobbin thread is once around the post. Why? Not really sure. So again, it's a first time offender, so we'll give it the benefit of the doubt and just try again. If we get a repeat offender, we might change bobbins. Okay, I've dropped my seam ripper here because that shows me where it was. That is just so habitual anymore. I hardly think of it. I always drop my blue seam ripper wherever I'm going to start. So I'm holding onto my top thread, and I'm going to take one stitch right in that point, pull up my bobbin thread and hang on to both of them, secure my stitches, moving just a little bit, sorry about the bump on the camera, and proceed with my quilting. Now, we were talking earlier about checking for tension. If I can reach, I'm going to reach under there with a fingernail and just run that under very firmly to see if there's any eyelashing, any awkwardness in the bottom, and it doesn't seem so. So I think we're good to go. I'll clip my thread tails to get them out of the way. Oh, I had long thread tails, my goodness sakes. Yes, we're going this way. And there I was just pretending that my design continued off the edge of the quilt and kind of chopping off my plumes as though they extended beyond that edge. And I'm sure you can see as I'm quilting, Joan actually has several borders on this quilt. There's the solid white one and then the little half square triangles. I certainly could have chosen to do different things in all of those borders. I chose to go a pretty simple way because I want to get to using it. But that is entirely your option. If you were wanting to practice some border designs, this would be a great opportunity to do it on a quilt like this. It's kind of nice to see that you do have options and they're whatever suits you. So doing something absolutely edge to edge across the entire quilt was an option. Doing something custom was an option. But this is the option I chose. It's probably the lightest possible semi-custom that you can do, and that's having just one border be different and the whole center filled with an all-over type design. Here again, I'm going to make my plumes look like they're extending right off the edge. Right there. And again. And then I'm just traveling in that ditch stitching till I get to where I think my echo would be. And I think I can fit one more in here. You know what? I'm forgetting that I have a ruler plate on there. I don't know if I'm gonna... We'll see. We will see if I get around the echo of this without bumping. I felt it hit. It's right there. Woo! We snuck it in, you guys. I'm so used to doing edge-to-edge stitching without that ruler plate on and gauging where my front bar, you know, how much space I've got left, that I kind of underestimated it with the ruler plate on. But we made it. And by the way, if that's something that you don't want to be worried about, bumping into that front bar and getting a nice square corner on your round plume, you can either chalk a line across there, or what I will sometimes do is take a piece of blue painter's tape, my all-time favorite tool, and just lay a line of that across. I'll show you. I'll show you. It's easier than just talking about it. So right here where I got that tiny little square spot, I know exactly where my barrier is. So let's just take a piece of blue painter's tape, right? And lay it right across the quilt using the seam lines to keep it straight all the way across, or pretty straight. The beauty of blue painter's tape is it's so blue that your eye can see it out of your peripheral vision super easily. So if I have that tape on there, I now know where my front barrier is. And when I advance my quilt, I can just lift that off, move it down, use the same piece of tape for the whole length of the quilt. And now I know, can't quilt below that. I'm telling you guys, I should be buying shares in 3M. They make the blue painter's tape, and I use it for so many things in my quilting studio, it's not even funny. If you are enjoying this real-life look at quilting in the studio, please do take a moment to like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss future episodes. And if you are just tuning in, we are in my long arm quilting studio. This is a live streaming episode of Quilting an Actual Project. Nothing is edited out. had a thread break a few moments ago, and I just leave that right in and talk about it as I work my way through it. So you, as perhaps a novice quilter, get to see what it really looks like. So again, if you are finding this helpful, like and subscribe. Each episode is a little bit different. Most often I'm working on client quilts, and so whatever color they are, that's what color the quilt is. Whatever the unique properties of it are, that's the things I'm talking about in that episode. It so happens in this one that I'm working on my own birthday quilt, which was a gift from a group of students and friends. It has lots of memory squares as we get more into the middle with handwritten names and locations. But again, most often this is client quilts, and so it's not particularly a lesson because I don't choose the quilt, for example, for how well the fabric will show up on camera. I just choose the quilt that I think has interesting things about the process as a whole. You know, perhaps it's wavy borders, or perhaps it's bulky seams, or perhaps, you know, on this one I thought the added dimension of doing something different in the quilted border would be an interesting topic. So though I know that white can be really difficult to see the quilting on camera, still I thought this would be an interesting episode for you, the viewer. So I hope so. But do keep in mind, these are not intended to be lessons per se. They're just me quilting and talking to you about the process as I do it. To do it on a quilt like this. It's kind of nice to see that you do have options.
Can you see right here?
And
I've got quite a
there,
bit of
whatever
space,
suits you.
almost 4
So
inches
doing
above my blue painter's tape.
It's kind of nice to
But
see.
I didn't feel like there was room to get a whole other motif in there without risking bumping up against. So I'm choosing. You know, I don't want a perfectly straight line here anyway, so that this pass is not delineated. So that's just going to be one of my scallops, and I'll fill it in on the next pass. I'm not sure if you heard that difference in sound. What you heard and what I'm feeling a little bit as I quilt is the thicknesses of the seam allowances that are in the backing, which is to be expected because there's a lot of piecing there too. But you don't typically feel that when you're quilting something that does not have a backing with significant piecing in it. It's not just a flat seam, right? There's intersections and points. So, not to worry. I am going over this pieced area just a little slower than I might otherwise, just to allow my machine to accommodate those heavy seams. There's a certain amount, because you actually are stitching at a high speed, there's a certain amount of almost flexing that's happening in your needle as you move from stitch to stitch. And so the faster you go, the more of that there is. And if you multiply that with also having bulky or awkward seams, that's when you're apt to get shredding of your thread or even breakage of your needle. So slowing down just helps reduce that a little bit and gives your needle basically time to accommodate and move in and out of those seams without flexing too much or being stressed too much. It's not like your machine is being overworked and you have to slow down so as not to hurt its feelings. It's just, it is literally the mechanics of that flexion on the needle. few more minutes in this pass. Great time to ask any questions. Please put a Q in front of them so Mr. Producer can easily locate them in the flood of comments, which I absolutely love. And also, I do have a piece of news to share with you guys, but I'm going to do it when I'm at the end of the pass and can concentrate on what I'm saying. So, don't go anywhere for the next few minutes because I do have a piece of exciting news to share with you. So this plume design is one that I do teach in depth in my Freehand Quilting Masterclass. That is an online, on-demand, full-fledged course, 6 modules long, that I offer. And in it I teach over 30 of these types of designs. All kinds of styles, you know, outdoorsy to floral to feminine to romantic, so that you have a whole repertoire of quilting designs at your disposal. And enrollment for that class is coming up again in October. So I do enrollment occasionally because though you do have access to the class for forever, it's always yours. When each class, when each new, I call them knots, when each new knot of quilter enrolls, then I hold a number of weekly live question and answer sessions with me, so you just get some really good interaction and a chance to talk about it as you're working through it. So that comes with each enrollment. I'm heavily involved in those Q&As and also in a private Facebook group for some weeks after that class launches. And so that's your best time to get some of my undivided attention and help, any help that you need. So if you do want more information on that masterclass, or if you'd like to get on the wait list with some of the extra bonuses that come with that, just check out my website, stitchedbysusan.com, and look for the classes and learning, and you will see the Freehand Quilting Masterclass. I've mentioned a couple times already my advance membership, which is a monthly subscription membership. It is all different content than is in the masterclass, but complementary. Some of it is more custom oriented. I have guest speakers, case studies, so that's kind of a walkthrough of quilts that I'm working on or have worked on. And that is basically a subscription membership where for your monthly fee you have access to all the content, and new content comes out each month. So that too you can find access to and information about on my website. If you do have questions about it, check out the FAQ sections of each of those firsthand and see if your questions are perhaps answered there. Some of the fabrics you're seeing in here are by Alison Glass. She is my current favorite fabric designer. If you don't know her, and if you love bright colors, you should look her up. Alison's prints, I think, are so, so beautiful. Now, I did hear from Joan that Alison's fabrics are not particularly in her wheelhouse, and I just find that so interesting and so fascinating and so wonderful that we quilters have different tastes and different styles, and yet there's something for each of us. This yellow one right here is an Alison Glass print, which is what made me think of it. And Joan was kind enough to use every little bitty bit of the fabrics that came in from around the world, and she even created binding for me. And it is mostly, maybe even all, Alison Glass fabrics. So it's going to be wonderful. I'll make sure that shows up in the photos too. We may not get to very many of the memory blocks, but boy, they are a treasure. It starts from the center where Mr. Producer sewed and signed a block, and so did my sister, and my sister made one representing my mom. So a piece of fabric that came out of, fabrics we still have of our moms. She's been gone for almost 30 years, so a long time, but she gave me my love of crafts and particularly of quilting. So, oh my goodness, is that ever sweet to have a block in the middle that represents my mom. Beyond that, there are blocks on here from many states. I should count how many. Lots from Canada. Ecuador I know is represented. Germany I know is represented. South Africa is represented. I mean, it is so amazing to me to think that we have this community of quilters around the world. And we have an opportunity to do a day like today where we're kind of in the sewing room together. It's a quilting bee gone viral, isn't it? Okay, here's a good point. Can we see this on the head cam, Dave? I'm not sure what all we can see. Not really. You can see these little half square triangles. Right about a ½ inch beyond what you can see is the edge of my white central area. And I've only got this little tiny bit up here. I'm not going to be able to fit a whole plume up there and turn around. You know what I mean? So I'm actually going to echo right back up there right now and fill in that place right away before I get myself painted tightly into that corner. See how that worked? Pretty slick. Easier to get there beforehand and quilt the thing in it than to try and get out of it, you know, and have simply no room after I've quilted something heading up there. And always easier to see, you know, working toward yourself than working into that little corner. I honestly think a big old chunk of all over quilting like this freehand is simply the ability to use your peripheral vision to see where you are and where you should be next. But if that's not working for you, that's what corners are for. Stopping, pausing, and saying, now, where do I need to go? What do I need to cover? Because I'm doing the same thing right now. I'm echoing back up into this awkward little space. Because if I fill it up quilting going that way, then what am I going to do? So I'm going to get up there and then fill it up coming towards me. Makes sense? I think we'll do one more here, and then I think we'll go ahead and advance. Again, I'm going to have those chopped off looking ones. And if you have difficulty envisioning what those would look like, go ahead and draw them in. And then just stop your quilting at the edge of that border. Super easy. So I'm going to go right to that little border, and I'm actually going to do a lock stitch right in it and go ahead and break thread, which just means pulling up my bobbin thread and trimming them both, because I'll need to baste next, so there's no point in leaving my needle down. Okay, have we got a bunch of questions? I know I need some magic elixir. All right. Linda, which Bernina Q24, Bernina 24 do you have? Looking online, I cannot see your frame. I have the Pro frame, and it is the 12-foot size, which I believe is the large. Anyway, there's 3 sizes, and I have the middle one. Gabrielle, did your frame have a bar for rolling the quilt top on? If yes, and you took it off, did you have to get anything to replace the ends of the bar? It does have a bar for rolling the quilt top on, and that's actually would have been the one that's lower down, which you can't really see in any of our camera angles, and I'm rolling my backing onto it. So I didn't replace it with anything, and I didn't take it off. Well, not really, because it's under here. Oh, apparently on this end you can see it right here. Oh, not quite, but there it is. There it is. So that would have been the top roller, and it's probably marked top, and I'm using it for my backing. This roller right here in front of me is intended to be the backing roller, the bottom end of it, and I've chosen not to roll anything on it. My quilt just rolls over it and down. Madge, question, and you can just do a Q if you want to, Madge. Dave's lazy, he just searches for a Q.
Wink, wink. Any tips for stitching in the ditch? This sounds simple, but I find myself afflicted by the wobbles, even when using a ruler. Madge, I do know this to be true. Comfort with a ruler comes with practice. Way early on, I made my first ruler quilt I think that I ever did. Had chevrons on it, much like the whole cloth baby quilts I've been doing, and then things quilted between. And when I look back at that one, the ruler lines are so incredibly wobbly because it just always seemed to slip and move. I don't know. And over time, that stops happening. And I think it's just you getting used to how much pressure it takes to hold it steady. But maybe try things like a slightly shorter ruler. Try a ruler that has a different type of handle. Try grippies on the bottom of the ruler. Any of those things that will help, give them a try. See if that does it for you. Megan, would it not have been more beneficial to remove the ruler plate before proceeding with the FMQ? Absolutely, I could, Megan, but knowing that every time I advance, I'm going to need it for that stitching in the ditch, I've opted not to. Otherwise, it would be off, on, off, on, off, on. But you're right. Those are my choices. Either I have a restricted throat space or I have to shift it on and off. Either one works. Pamela, just purchased a Bernina Q16 plus sit down. Any thoughts or tips for free motion quilting on large projects like this one? I don't typically quilt whole quilts on a sit down, Pamela, although I did it one time. Basting is going to be your friend. Basting as a whole to keep the quilt at large in place, and also some type of holding mechanism. So Bernina sells round red frames. Martelli sells little handheld palm-shaped grippers that you can hold the quilt and move it about. So first off is basting to keep it at large, organized, and secondly is those fatigue-reducing grippy bits that move the quilt without the layers slipping. Those should help. Two parts to this question, apparently. I'm ready. Wait, Mr. Producer sews and Mr. Producer has sewed once. Well, actually twice, because there's two seams on each of these blocks. There's a triangle on each side. He actually did video it. At some point, like, it would be really fun to have a little compilation of, say, bloopers that embarrass me and then the quilting of Dave. That would be fun. Joan, I'm wondering how many others are seeing their blocks. By the way, without any input from me, Susan is using my favorite quilting pattern. Oh, awesome. That's great, Joan, that came up. Wendy, would it be possible for you to trace your stitch pass? Not super easily, Wendy, but aren't you in the masterclass, Wendy? Because this is the plume design, and you can find it in there, and there's a PDF sheet in there that you can trace over it. So you've got a quilting path, pretty sure on that. Connie, about the wobbly lines with rulers, I wear quilter gloves to keep a better grip to the ruler. Game changer. Oh, great idea, Connie. Thanks for chiming in with that. So quilter gloves are just a little bit rubberized or sticky in some way, right? And would hold your hand firmly on the ruler. That's another great tool to try. Thanks for that idea. Tuesday. I have learned so much from you. You're taking the fear away. That is the best compliment ever. Seriously. I think that's why I do what I do, is to take the fear of choices and decisions and what if I do it wrong away. Just do it. It's so much fun and so rewarding. Okay, you guys. I think we are at 2 hours already, so I think I'm going to call it an end of a show with that. Side personal note, I'm heading up to visit some dear friends who live a couple hours away. They're kind of second parents to us. And he had a stroke about 10 days ago. And so we want to go visit them this afternoon and stay overnight. But I think we've sampled everything on this quilt, right? We've sampled, obviously, the basting, the stitching in the ditch, and stabilizing that border. We've, in fact, stitched a piano key border. We've talked about using multiple colors of threads on a quilt that's got high contrast fabrics. We've done some of the all-over stitching. You've got a good idea of how I'm going to proceed. I'm going to repeat that in each pass. But I did promise you news, so I'm not going to go away without giving you that. This is, and I'll seriously try not to get emotional about this, quilting initially on the long arm was a hobby for me. I mean, quilting was, but even when I got my long arm, it began as a hobby. And then I started doing it for other people, for pay, for hire, but still very much a hobby, very much pin money, just trying to sort of support my habit, right? over the course of the last 3 years, I have invested more time into purposely and intentionally building a business with it and finding the best ways to reach as many people as I could with the things that I want to share. And you guys, thanks to you, my milestone this week is that I've actually incorporated my business at the advice of my accountant. It is of a size now that it needs an identity of its own, and it needs, certain things in place to handle it, and taxes and filing and all those things. It is incredible to me. And I want to take the time to celebrate it, because I don't know that many women get the opportunity to take something that they love doing and grow it into something that also will support their family, will give them enough to give and be generous. And that's what Stitched by Susan has done for me. This is incredible. Anyway, a huge thank you to all of you, because you're the reason why. You're the reason why I do it, and your support and your encouragement have been the reason that I continue and will continue. So here's to quilting. We have lots more to do together, and I am just so grateful for the journey and so thankful to all of you that join me on it. So for today, do we have any more questions or comments? I mean, yeah, so many of you are congratulating. I appreciate it. And it's just, it's surreal sometimes. It's surreal to realize that when I get up in the morning and do the thing that I love doing, and then just take the time to share what I'm doing, to show my work in the terms our teachers used to use with our arithmetic, show your work. That's kind of how I started. I was like, this is how I bind my quilts. I'll just show people what I do. This is how I load my quilts. I'll just show people what I do. That's how it started. And that has grown into this company. It's amazing. So I'm here for the long haul. I love hearing from those of you that email, or even your comments on these YouTube episodes with what you appreciate. That's what fuels me and keeps me going. And also what you would like to see or what you would like to learn. That's what gives me ideas. So I will do my very best to keep answering those. And if I can't answer them, I'll bring in guest people who can. I certainly don't know everything. I'm just showing my work as I do it. So any questions or things before we go, or I'm going to wind her down? Okay. Northern Sioux. Here it comes. If you ever need a boot in the bum, we're here for you. I appreciate that. Everybody needs those bum booters, don't they? Everyone does. So, yeah. Thanks for joining me today. I'm just trying to think on my feet here. This is the 1st of September. I don't know that I will be back to do another episode until the very end of September. Again, a personal story. My dad is 93, and I'm actually moving my family, not me personally only. We're moving my parents 1,000 miles north to be nearer to several of my siblings, and that's all coming down the pike in the next 10 days to 2 weeks. So lots of packing, U-hauling, flights, moving of cars, and moving of people. So that's what I'm going to be doing in September. So appreciate your patience. Probably we won't have another live and unscripted till the 3rd or 4th Friday in September. But again, sign up for my newsletter and I will let you know when it's happening, with a picture of what the project is and what it's going to be all about. And again, if you do have ideas for things you'd like to see, let me know. I do generally quilt on client quilts, so I'll just keep my eye out then for a project that highlights that thing you're wanting to learn, and we'll do that as an episode together. So thanks again so very much for joining me. I'm Susan Smith, and I will see you next time.